Bridges is a developmental psychologist and researcher at the Institute of Human Development at the University of California at Berkeley. In her latest work, Margaret studied how Latino children develop strong social-emotional skills in spite of facing academic challenges. Recently, she led a team in creating the Mexican-American Socialization MAS scale, a measure to assess the social-emotional skills of Mexican-American children. Please help me welcome Dr. Margaret Bridges.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here today. I felt like I should have come swimming from the East Bay, but I squeaked in just before my talk, so I appreciate you're all making the effort to come out today. I want to talk a bit about nurturing the strong social-emotional skills of young Mexican heritage children. As a researcher, it seems like a cruel joke to anyone with well-meaning intentions about improving the health and well-being of children, and certainly to the children themselves. Time and time again, research shows that disadvantaged children are really disadvantaged. Difficulties seem to permeate their lives. The same young children who are in families, the families experiencing economic hardship, they're also more likely to have parents who are struggling with employment, housing, relationship, mental health issues that make it harder for them to be responsive to their children. And the children feel it. The long story short, poverty takes its toll on kids and interferes with their optimal cognitive and social-emotional development. Children are resilient, you know that, but even a kid with grit has her limits. So imagine our surprise and our relief when we realized that this was only part of the story, that we had gotten it wrong. As was said, I'm a developmental psychologist at UC Berkeley, and I do research on preschool kids, particularly Latino preschool kids, and how their families and preschool experiences help shape their cognitive and social-emotional outcomes. So basically, here's my punchline. In spite of economic hardship, with almost 2/5 of the Mexican-American children, families falling below the poverty line in the US, many were starting school with remarkable social agility and emotional maturity. In fact, we could detect no differences in social competence between these young children and their peers from European American families, except for a small group who come from the very poorest families. And to researchers, this is remarkable. As I said, we have this sense that with disadvantage comes disadvantage. And yet, these results corroborate other recent studies. Mexican-American kindergartners display robust cooperative skills, respect adults, and eagerly participate in classroom tasks, whether their behavior is being judged by teachers or their parents. So it's not just their mom saying, I have a fabulous child. It's the teachers who are agreeing with these skills. But what does this mean for educators and reform advocates who have come to equate economic poverty with this host of social and cognitive deficits and a lot of negative outcomes? So backing up a bit, indeed, early gaps in oral language and pre-literacy skills do widen early in life for Latino children. Our Berkeley-based team continues to track a national sample that's nationally representative of about 4,700 children in the United States, including many children of Mexican heritage. We recently published some results with our UCLA colleagues showing that by about age 4, Mexican heritage children, on average, were 6 to 7 months behind their European American peers. So this infamous achievement gap that's talked about actually opens up long before children are achieving in kindergarten. We see it by age 2. So this makes for a really tough entry into the academic demands, as it were, of kindergarten. So what's going on? Our studies and others document that the disadvantage experienced by many low-income document the disadvantage experienced by many low-income Mexican-American children. On average, their families are larger, have lower levels of maternal education and employment, and higher levels of maternal depression compared to families of their European American peers, our primary comparison group in some of this work. Of particular interest, there's much less storybook reading, fewer bedtime routines that include Goodnight Moon, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, or their equivalents, and fewer explicit learning activities, things like that are taking place at home, counting grapes as they're put on a plate to eat, or reciting the ABCs ad nauseum for grandma. In fact, many mothers suggest to us that with their low levels of education, they save that sort of the book learning for when their children start school. That's the teacher's job, so they leave that for the teacher in school to take care of. And that gets to our surprise, because that information only tells part of this story. Mexican American parents generally are very involved in their children's lives and supportive of their children's well-being. Mothers report experiencing lower levels of household conflict compared to other racial and ethnic groups, and tend to be warm and responsive with their children. Simultaneously, these mothers tend to have high expectations for their children in terms of respectful, well-mannered behavior, what's called bien educado, which in combination appear to nurture their children's strong social-emotional skills. And their mothers aren't the only ones who think these skills are important. You just heard the previous presentation about having the growth mindset. And economist, Nobel Prize winner James Heckman talks about, as well as popular analysts like New York Times' Paul Tough, are talking about the grit and character that are so important for success in life, fundamental to being successful in your work and your life generally. So what have been called soft skills are coming up again and again as essential to getting ahead in life. And many Mexican American children have these skills and more. They're skilled in terms of, they're skilled socially, and many are bilingual and bicultural, which is particularly useful in our increasingly diverse and global economy. So this story is complex. The news about social-emotional skill bodes well for all of us. And admittedly, the findings about pre-literacy and early math skills, some of the cognitive skills, pose some real challenges. Currently, a quarter of our children in the US are Latino, and by 2050, in about 35 years, it'll be 1 in 3. So the largest subgroup of these, about 70%, are of Mexican heritage. So we need to learn more about how to nurture and support this group. And certainly all children. But we want to work to encourage these children, to support these children, so that their academic outcomes are on par with their social-emotional skills that are so strong. Our findings point to the need to understand young Mexican-American children and all young children in context within this complex web of influences that include their influences, their outcomes, their advantages, their disadvantages. We had mistakenly assumed that the disadvantages faced by many Latino children play out in the same way across their cognitive and social-emotional skills. Instead, discovering the robust social-emotional strengths of Mexican-American children points to the powerful cultural assets from which teachers and all of us interested in promoting children's well-being can scaffold to promote stronger outcomes in other areas. Research tells us how important social competence is to school achievement and to success in life. And so here are some specific ways that we can think about how adults can build from young children's strong social-emotional skills to nurture their skills in other areas. Capitalize on children's social-emotional strengths to connect with them. Establishing warm, caring relationships is really the foundation of children's learning. If possible, facilitate learning by using children's home language. This shows them respect and develops vocabulary and concepts in their first language, which we know from research is really the ticket to improving their language skills eventually in English. And best of all, this having rich communication with children then promotes your emotional connection with them. When children are quiet, do not assume that they understand what you're talking about. With the common cultural emphasis on respect, in particular, many Mexican heritage children may think that asking questions of their teacher or the adult in charge is disrespectful. Use their strong social-emotional skills to engage them in a dialogue, to understand exactly what they're thinking and what they're getting. Familiarize yourself with the families and communities that have raised these children, that have raised your children that you're working with. Learning more about them and their many assets involves learning about their families, their communities, their culture, their history. The more you know and understand, the more likely you are to be able to interact and support them in positive ways and work with them effectively. And lastly, recognize the strong foundation that your children's families have built. Families are a great resource and often really want to get involved, connect with them, include them in activities that support their children's learning. Help them develop another repertoire of learning and learning interactions with their children. For example, everything from loaning them books to modeling how you can look at a storybook together, even if you can't read the storybook. How do you do that? What do you do? How would you interact with them around playing with things, talking? Rich language is so important to children. And so how could you model for parents about engaging with them in rich language that could make such a big difference to their children? This is all to say, learn from your children so you can understand the complexity of skills and challenges that they carry with them. As someone who keeps learning this, admittedly, it may not be as clear as you think. And build from their skills and advantages to support their learning and resilience for the challenges ahead. They're eager to learn. They're likely sitting and waiting and listening. Thank you.